In this video, I'm going to show you how to build a dynamic table display with a drop-down element for the user to filter down to the results that they want to see at any given moment displayed in the table. Now, by dynamic table, I just mean we're going to pull data from our database, and of course, our data is continuously updated. And so the values in our table are going to be continuously updated. So that's par for the course. Bubble does this for us. But this straightforward structure, this dynamic table with a drop-down element, has wide applicability. It really has tons of applications across many categories of web apps. And so just to give you a few examples out of many possible applications. And so this is an example of a dynamic table with a drop-down. And for a business to consumer application, for instance, this could be a fitness app, and the user is choosing from the drop-down the particular exercise routine that they're going to do today. And whichever one they select is going to show their past 7 sessions in that same exercise, for instance. And so they can review their recent progress at a glance and be able to focus on what results they want to achieve in their current session. Now, this could be an e-commerce store catering to video podcasters and offering electronics equipment for that niche. So for instance, microphones, webcams, tripods, USB drives. And so this could be where they can filter to the equipment that they're looking to buy next and read product reviews there on your site before they narrow down to which model of microphone they want to buy, for example. All right, now going with a business-to-business application. This could be an e-commerce store where customer issues as they come in are assigned to your customer service representatives, and you as a manager can look at the status of these customer issues. And the drop-down allows you to focus on a given status that's most relevant at any given time. For instance, you might want to, at a glance, look at the urgent customer issues. These are issues where you might have to get involved in following up with the customer. Another status option, in progress, that could be your customer representative is in the process of helping your customer resolve this issue. And there are those that are already resolved in this third status here. And as this is a dynamic table, these values will update. So as issues get resolved, they will change status on this table in real time accordingly. And lastly, this table could be part of a dashboard showing the top customers for your business for different time frames. For instance, from the drop-down, the time frames are week to date, quarter to date, and year to date. And when you select week to date, these are folks who have spent quite a bit of money within just this past week. So you might want to send them a thank you email with a coupon to cross-sell another product relevant to what they've purchased. And at the opposite end of this time spectrum, your top customers for the past year, they've had some time to enjoy the products they've purchased from your business. And so you might send an email asking for a testimonial on your customer service or for a product review, along with a generous coupon for their next purchase with you. Maybe you're rolling out a loyalty program and you can invite them to join. All right, now that you see how widely applicable this table plus drop-down element structure is, I'm going to get right to showing you the step-by-step of how to build this within Bubble. But first, I just want to take a quick second to mention, for those new to my channel, I'm Kevin Chang from Do Your Dream Work. And I have tutorials on how to do various things within the Bubble platform. Bubble.io is a powerful and flexible no-code app building platform. And so if you're building an app, adding functionalities or features to an existing app, or troubleshooting issues while you're building on Bubble, be sure to check out my videos on this channel for any content that can be of help to you right now. All right, then, with that said, let's get right to building this dynamic table with the drop-down elements step by step. I'm going to show you how to build the table in our last example, which is the table of top customers. And the drop-down filtering allows us to select week to date, quarter to date, year to date from these 3 time period options. Now, what are top customers? These are people who have spent the most within these 3 time periods. So the top customers are top customers based on total spending. So this second column here, that's what we're going to order or sort the rows, the customers ranking, if you will, by. And that's how things are shown here on this table. From largest amount to smallest amount. And by the way, I've chosen to show the top 5 customers. 5 is obviously an arbitrary number, and you can choose to show however many customers that you would like. And so what we're focused on here, what we want to be able to pull from the database are essentially 3 different sorting orders of these rows so that we get the top 5 customers based on total spending for these 3 time periods: week to date, quarter to date, and year to date. And the other 3 pieces of information associated with a particular customer that's shown here are the customer ID, just an ID assigned to that customer when they became a customer, the last purchase date, and the customer since date. So obviously the month and the year since they first became a customer. So now this is the data that we're displaying in this table. Now this data is going to be pulled from a customer's data type that I've set up. And I'll show you what that looks like. So this is the customer's data type, the table of customer data that's pulled and displayed on the table. So we have the customer since date column, last purchase date column, the customer ID in this third column here. Now the key columns here for sorting the order of the rows in that table are going to be these 3 total spending columns. And these are respectively the amount that each customer spent with my business over those 3 different time periods reflected in the drop-down filter. And so to arrive at these numbers, the amount of the purchases that each customer made during that period of time needed to be summed up. Now, there are many ways to do this, but one way that makes a lot of sense in terms of adding up a given customer's purchases during a period of time, for instance, during the current quarter to date, is that since their total amount of spending won't change between purchases, so all we have to do is to add the amount of a new purchase to their current sum for this period. So again, it makes good sense to calculate a new total amount of spending when the person has just made a purchase. But the details of that implementation can vary. So here I'm going to assume that that calculation has been done. And so for each of the 3 time periods, we've got the total spending for each of our customers calculated and placed here in these 3 columns, the total spending for week to date, quarter to date, and year to date. So that when a user selects from the drop-down and picks one of these options, one of these time periods, then that's going to trigger a workflow that will choose the right column for pulling the data from the top 5 customers and displaying it in that table. And so now at this point, let's get back into the bubble editor and I'll build a table from scratch. And along the way, we'll implement the workflows that the drop-down will trigger. All right, I want to show you the finished table again on this dashboard page. All right, so this is the area we're going to put the table. And on another page, I've removed the table. And I'm going to go into the bubble editor for that page and start building it. And first, I'm just going to put a group. in this area. First, I'm going to rename the group. It's at the bottom of this page, so I'm going to call it group bottom. And here I'm just going to put a white background. And I want to match the style of the other elements on this dashboard. So this is a sales dashboard with the key pieces of information that are shown here in these cards. So to make this a card, I'm going to put some shadow here, and I'm going to use this. And the only other thing I need to do is set the roundness to 10. Then on the layout tab, this is a column container, and it's going to contain basically two elements overall. The top element is going to be the label, essentially, and the drop-down filtering mechanism, the drop down, and below that is going to be the table. And between these two elements, I want to add 10 pixels of gap. Then just to give myself a little more space, I'm going to increase the height a little bit, 100 pixels there. So now the sides of this group container go all the way out to the edge where it touches the left column here and also the right column of this dashboard page. So I'm just going to add some margins and also some padding to give it, and the elements I'm going to put in it, some room to breathe. So for the top and bottom borders, 10 pixel paddings as well as margins, and 20 pixel paddings for the left and right sides of the container, and similarly 20 pixels for left and right margins. So just a quick refresh on what that looks like. There should be just a space now ready for us to put elements into. So first, again, I'm going to put a row container in another group. And that's going to have the label of the table as well as the drop down. And I'm just going to call it group drop down. And that's going to be a row container. Switch it to row, and I do also want a gap between the label and the drop down, and that's going to be a column gap. So that's going to be 20 pixels column gap. All right, this looks fine so far. Now I'm going to put a text element in here for the label, and that's going to say top customers. And I'm actually going to use heading 6 for this. And for the layout, in the layout tab, it's a row container that's containing this, and I just want to center this text element vertically, and everything else looks fine. And actually I want to make the text just a tad bigger, so instead of 18 pixels I'm actually gonna bump it up to 20. All right, and now let's put in the drop down element, and that is an input element. Place that here. We first change the name of the drop down, top customers drop down, and for the placeholder I'm going to use week to date, and that's just for you to see how the text would look while you're doing the editing. So what's in this placeholder isn't what your users will see. All right, and here, choices style, you're choosing from static or dynamic choices. And we want dynamic choices, and we'll choose below exactly what that is. And this is a good time for me to show you the choices I've set up. And this is actually an option set. So let me just show you in the data tab. It's just one of my option sets, and it's called OS for option set, OS drop down. And it simply has the three options: week to date, quarter to date, and year to date. And since we know these three options ahead of time, this is a perfect use case for using an option set. Instead of putting this into a table or into a column and then pulling this from the table, because it's going to be slower to fetch data from the table, and it's also going to use workload units, whereas the option sets are included in the source code that is downloaded to the browser, otherwise known as the client, and it executes at the browser, so it is quicker. And this spares the use of workload units. So now Back out to the editor, we're going to choose the type of choices to be OS dropdown. In the choices source, we want to choose all the dropdowns because we're pulling all the options in this option set into the dropdown element. Now the option caption is what the text is going to show up as, and it's just going to be the current option display. So whichever option that is displayed as text. Then the default value is when the page is loaded for the first time, which period do you want the table to show? And I've just chosen to show the week to date. Then below, I'm going to increase the size of the font in the drop down slightly, 18 pixels. And everything else I'm going to leave unchanged. And go to the layout tab. Just want to center vertically the drop down. And here, as far as the size of the drop down element, I'm going to make it slightly wider. I won't have the height fixed. And I'll make it slightly less tall. Then if we go out to preview this, all right. So we see the top part, the label and the drop down for the table are there. And if we look at the finished table, all right, that's about how that looks. Then back into the editor, we'll now put the table in. And the table is a container. And right underneath the label, and first I'll rename the table Top Customers. And I always like to work on the Appearance tab first. The type of content, the table is going to pull in the customer's data type. This is what I showed you earlier. It's this one here in the data source. Now, here, since by default, when this page is first loaded, we're going to be showing the default time period of week to date. That's also the position that we've set the dropdown to be by default. So here, we're going to do a search for, and this is going to be the customer's data type. And Bubble very conveniently gives us the ability to do a sort whenever we choose the data source. So in this case, we want to sort by the week to date total spending column, which is this one right here. And this is one of the 3 columns I showed you earlier. In the sort order, descending, yes, that's how I want to have this sorted from largest to smallest amounts. So we're going to say yes, and we're done. Then as I look below, I don't see anything that needs to be changed. The layout tab. Now what I want to do is to let the width of the table stretch out. So I want to uncheck fit width to content. So now the table stretches out to fill the entire area. I'm done with the layout tab here. Next, we'll go to the conditional tab and define 2 conditions. And these are key to displaying the right data based on what the user selects from the dropdown for this table. And essentially, since by default, we're showing the week-to-date data, meaning the top customers based on spending for the week-to-date period. And remember, we just did a sort when we selected the data source. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to, let me just go in here and just define another condition. And the condition is going to be when the user chooses the quarter to date option from the dropdown, and then the other condition is going to be correspondingly for the year to date option if they choose that from the dropdown. For both of these, we want to sort by those 2 periods. And again, we have the columns of that data that I showed you earlier. These are the 2 columns for quarter to date and year to date. And so the condition is just going to pick the right column to sort by. And when we've sorted the right column, then all the other data that gets displayed will be correct. So now, in order to define this condition, we actually need to declare a variable called a custom state in Bubble. And this custom state is going to take on the value of the option that the user chooses from the dropdown. So now you can create the custom state variable on any element on this page. And since this variable is pertinent to the table that we're building here, I'm just going to create that on this table. So on the tabletop customers that we're working on this top part of the property editor, there's a circle with an I in it, and it stands for element inspector. We just click that. The element inspector slides out. There are no custom states defined right now, and we're going to add a new custom state right here. And we'll just call this time period to reflect the fact that the three choices from the dropdown, they basically define a time period. And this is going to be one of the options of the option set. So it's going to be OS dropdown, created, and we want to set the default value, as we said, to week to date. So when someone first arrives at this page, when it's first loaded, it's going to show the default table, which is the week to date top customers. So all right, now that we've defined this variable time period, we can go and specify the conditions we want Bubble to run when this page is loaded. So condition number 1, when this tables, and we want to scroll down all the way to where it says custom states, and there's the time period custom state we just defined. So when this table's time period is quarter to date, we want to choose the data source to be, do a search for, all right, this is going to be the same data type of customers, but we're just going to sort by a different column. And this time we're going to sort by the quarter to date column, total spending quarter to date. And again, we want to sort so that the order goes from the largest amount to the smallest amount. So descending, we want to choose yes. And the next condition is the same one, except it's for the year to date. When this table time period is year to date, we want to specify the data source. Again, this is going to be the same table, but we want to sort by the year to date column, descending order. All right, so these are the two key conditions we just defined that will ensure that the data, when the user chooses either the quarter to date or the year to date, that the top customer's data is going to be displayed correctly in this table. All right, now let's put in some elements into this table to actually display this data. So now the table element, we have the ability to have the first row to be the headings row. So for each column, there'll be a heading for what that column is. Now we know from the finished table, there are 4 columns. And by default, when we just drop the table here, there are 3 by default. So we just want to add another one, and it's very simple to do. All we want to do is in the top part, the very top part of any of these columns, we can right click and add column to right is one of the top choices here. All right, so it's really simple how to add a column or to remove one from the table. Then the first row here where it says H1, the property editor for that, what we want to do is to check on the appearance tab, we want to check make this row sticky. And that means we want this to be a row of headings. And we can set the color. So we set this row apart from the main content of the table. And I'm just going to choose primary 20, this color. Then on the layout tab, fit height to content. Now I'm going to drag a text element in here to hold our headings. And this is going to be customer ID. And I like to choose the heading 6 for this. And for the layout, center this vertically. Now this is the text element. In the cell here that contains the text elements, we note that the cell is a row container, and we just want to center it within the cell, just like that. Then why don't we just copy and paste and drag it over to the next column. And this will be in the appearance tab. We can edit this to be total spending. And I'm going to just take a quick look at the finished table. Yeah, that's what it is. Total spending. Now, similarly, the layout and the cells layout, we can center that and do the same thing. Next column. This is going to be for last purchase date. So in its cell, adjust the layout to center it. And for the last column, the heading, that's going to be called customer since. We're going to put a customer since date there. And in its cell, adjust the layout, center it, and just take a quick look. All right, it looks like we have the headings in place here. All right, back to the editor. Now, the way the table element works, it's like a two-dimensional version of the repeating group in Bubble. So what I mean is that when we style the first row, and each row corresponds to a customer, and we're showing the top 5 customers here. So when we style the elements in this top row, that styling is going to repeat for each row that comes beneath it. And it will pull rows from that table, the customer's data type, that table that I showed, as many rows as there are data, or the number of rows that you specify. Again, I chose to have 5 rows here, and you can choose however many you like. And so let's style the first row here. For the first cell of the first row, again, we want a text element. We actually want to display, and as you can see, as soon as I drop this text element into the first row, the first cell here in the first row, you see the text element repeat in the 2 rows underneath. So it works just like a repeating group in that regard. So here, what this is going to display is the customer ID. So this is a piece of info I need to pull from the database. So I'm going to choose Insert Dynamic Data. And it's going to be current rows customers for the customer's data type. And we want the ID. And for the placeholder, just so we don't have this long expression in that cell as we're building the table, and it looks more realistic to what it actually will look like. In the canvas placeholder, I'm going to put 101. Then the rest of this is just about styling it. Heading 6. For the layout, center it in the cell. Then we want to click into the cell that is in, center the text element. And then what I want to do here is you want to click on the left margin area, not in the cell that contains the customer ID, but in this area, the left border, and it says 1. And when you select it, you're going to be able to style the entire row. And here, what I want to do is, because I want to show the data for 5 customers here, and each row is kind of tall, so I'm going to reduce the height. I'm going to drop the minimum height to 40 pixels, and I'm going to fit height to content. Then on the Appearance tab, where it says Row Count, set fixed number of repeating rows. Since I want the top 5 customers, I'm going to set the number of rows to 5. By default, it shows 3 rows. I'm going to set it to 5. All right, we see that reflected on the table here. All right, now let's set the display for the other columns. And I'm going to be purposely do a copy and paste here. I'm going to drag it over to actually 2 columns over like that, and set up the last 2 columns first, and I'll come back to set up the display for the total spending column. That's going to be a little bit different. So here I'm going to change the ID because we're displaying the last purchase date, not the ID. So we're going to choose the last purchase date, and I do want to format this. And I'm going to choose the formatting of month, date, year like this. And the placeholder, I'm going to just put date. And just like before, click into the cell, center this. All right, copy and paste, and drag the copy over to the next column. And again, this is just adjusting this for the actual data we want to display in this calc column. And that's going to be, instead of the last purchase date, it's going to be the customer since date. Remember, we have a column for that. And I actually want to adjust the formatting as well, because for that, I only want to show the month and date. So I'm just going to choose month and year like that. First three letters of the month and year. And again, just want to center this. All right, now we're going to work on the total spending column. Now, remember that when this table is loaded, it knows what to display based on either when it's first loaded, it's going to by default display the week to date total spending amounts sorted from largest to smallest, which is what we want. And if the user chooses another option, either quarter to date or the year to date options, it's going to find that column sorted and again display those amounts from largest to smallest. And what we're going to do here is actually set all three columns here, turn the visibility off at first so they don't display, but in the beginning moments of either when the user first come to this page, when it's first loaded, or when a selection is made, when the user chooses from the dropdown, that's going to set that variable we call time period that we set up earlier and simultaneously cause a reload of this section of the page where the table is. And whenever a reload occurs, Bubble will check the conditional we set, and from whichever time period that variable, the custom state, whichever time period that indicates, then it will turn the visibility of that column on so that that data is displayed. So I'm going to set these three columns here, just like what I described. So first, let's copy and paste so that we have a text element here. Drag it over here. Then in this case, let me rename this to be, we'll say total spending week to date. And we're going to show naturally total spending week to date. Select that column. And since this is a currency value, we're going to format it as a currency. So we just hit format it as, and the number formatting pop-up appears. And we want to just choose the top one there, number type, currency, decimal place. Now, if you have decimals, certainly choose the value here, but I have whole numbers, so I'll leave this blank. So the period for the decimal separator, the comma for the thousand separator, and the currency, I want to choose US dollars. Use parentheses for negative numbers. In this case, we won't have negative numbers because these are purchases, but I'm going to choose that anyway. It doesn't really affect anything. Then for the placeholder, I'm just going to put a $sign SPD for spend. Then I'm going to actually copy and paste another one right next to it. And that's going to be for the quarter to date. And actually, let me just click back to the week to date one. And there's one thing I need to do here. I'm just checking the font size. But the one thing I need to do here is, as I said earlier, I need to turn the visibility off. So uncheck this. So it's not visible on first load. And in fact, I'll do the same here for the quarter to date. Turn this off. I'll rename this. This will be the total spending quarter to date. And then go back to the appearance tab and change this to the quarter to date. Total spending. Format stays the same. Placeholder stays the same. And copy and paste. And similarly, and the visibility has been turned off because I've copied the element from quarter to date. And the only thing we need to change here is we want to choose the column of data that is the year to date data. And that's all we need to do. Now let's go and refresh the display, the preview. All right. Everything looks fine except the total spending column should be showing the default data for week to date. And there's one thing that we need to do, and I just remember, and this is why it's not shown. So for each of these 3 columns, back in the editor now, we need to specify a condition. And this is going to be familiar to you by now. We need to say this table where we've defined that time period custom state variable, and we want to come down to the bottom here. So when this table's time period is week to date, then we want to make this element visible. All right. And as you can surmise, the next text element quarter to date is similar. You just want to say this table's time period is quarter to date, and we want to turn the visibility back on. And finally, the year to date. Let me just rename this to be year to date. Time period is year to date, then visibility back on. And I also want to change the formatting of this date to be this one. Okay, that's just a slight change to the formatting. There's not anything wrong with this. All right, now let's refresh the preview, and we should have the default shown right here. All right, it is. We just need to center the dollar figures, and we see that we hadn't done that. So we want to click into the cell, go to layout, and center that. Now, refresh again. All right. So this is displaying correctly. Now, there's one last thing we need to do to make the display of the other 2 options correct as well. Because right now, if you were to choose quarter to date, year to date, nothing happens. All right. The data stays the data for the week to date, the default. And that's because we need to specify a workflow that changes that custom state called time period whenever the user chooses one of these other options. So let's go back to do that, and that will be the final action we need to do. Now, the drop-down element, by definition, is an input element. So Bubble has a trigger element already defined for it. So again, the drop-down is an input. So when we go to workflow, we hit new for a new event or trigger for this workflow. What we want is under elements, says an input value is changed. And that's the one we want. Again, the dropdown is an input. So its value has changed when someone chooses one of the values. So which element is the dropdown? Then what happens when someone does change the value of the dropdown? Then we want to change, we come down to element actions. We want to change the state of an element. And by state, this is the custom state, the time period. All right. So first, the element that the state was defined on was table. This was the table top customers, that one. Then the custom state is time period. And the value is whichever one the user selected. So it will be this drop-down's value. It's as simple as that. All right, so that will be the final step. Let's go back out here, refresh. All right, we have defined the conditions already for showing the columns, the correct columns to display here under total spending. And it's also sorted the right way whenever it's displayed from largest to smallest. And for the other 3 columns of this table, it gets the correct values to display from the conditions we set on the table itself, which basically picks the right columns to do a sorting. So with those conditions set, and now we've connected the drop-down and the selection of these values to the time period custom state, which the conditions use to change the values to display. Now all the connections of this process have been made. All right, so let's check this out. All right, week to date is the default, quarter to date, and year to date. All right, and we see the values change. Now, they might seem a little subtle at first, but they have changed. So let me do this again. So quarter to date, well, I'll start from week to date. All right, this is quarter to date. All right, there's a slight change there. And then year to date, there's going to be an amount that's going to be over $1,000 here on the top one. Okay, and that's what that is. So that's the table. And if we go back to the finished table, we see that that is what we've built. And now, as I've said in the beginning of this video, this table with a drop down for filtering down to the results that the user wants to see, that is a element that has wide application. And I've given you a few examples as well at the beginning of the video. And this has been how to build this functionality into your Bubble app. All right, now, hopefully this has been helpful in terms of showing you how to build a dynamic table with a drop-down filtering mechanism into your Bubble app, or give you some insights for building similar functionality in your Bubble app. Now, before I end this video, I just want to mention that if you're building your app, adding new functionalities to your existing app, or dealing with tech issues within your Bubble app, there are two services that I offer that can help. One is my existing app service, where I will add features or functionalities to your app per your request, troubleshoot issues, fix bugs, and or perform any other service requests, all in a transparent, fixed-priced service plan. And this lets you know exactly what your cost will be in advance. And you can pause or cancel your service plan at any time with just a few clicks. And beyond the cost transparency, this service frees up your valuable time so you can spend it working on other important priorities in your business rather than dealing with tech issues within your Bubble app. And another service that I offer is my coaching calls, where during the call, I answer your questions and help you get unstuck if you're building your Bubble app or trying to resolve issues in your existing app on your own. The links to both of these services are in the descriptions if you like more details. All right, now, as always, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.